Oh, let there be light. Hi.
Good evening. My name is Glenn Lowry, and I'm the director of the Museum of Modern Art, and I want to welcome you to what should be an exciting conversation. I know it's a wet and gloomy night out there, but it is not wet and it is not gloomy in here. We are so thrilled to have William Kentridge and the cast of Lulu and Peter Gelb, the brilliant and guiding force of the Metropolitan Opera, with us tonight. This is one of those rare evenings where we at the Museum of Modern Art can share with our colleagues and friends who are involved with the Metropolitan Opera a moment to hear from extraordinary artists about the work they do. And for us at the Museum of Modern Art, this is a bit of a reprise because in 2010, 15 years ago, we had the honor of working with William on a major exhibition that coincided with the presentation of the Nose at the Metropolitan Opera. So it brings us back together, at least for a moment here. We're thrilled that you're here. We look forward to the conversation. And over to you, Peter.
Thank you so much, Glenn. Thank you, Glenn. The weather may not be nice, but it probably is appropriate Lulu weather, I imagine. For any of you who might have been watching either the network or local news coverage yesterday, one of the features on the news was a story on all the networks of the New York Met mascot, Mr. Met, who has an oversized baseball head on his shoulders instead of a normal head. And he was conducting a representative group yesterday morning of Metropolitan Opera Orchestra members and chorus members in a performance of the team's fight song, Meet the Mets. But strategically placed in the background was a very large banner featuring William Kentridge's drawing of the half-naked Lulu, which we thought was a good juxtaposition between the World Series and the Metropolitan Opera. Certainly, we've advanced both forms, I'm sure, with that. It's appropriate, I think, to be at the Met, to be at MoMA, I should say, because, as Glenn pointed out, William Kentridge is that rare artist who is equally welcome at museums and opera houses. And Lulu's provocative story has stimulated William's creative juices in new and thrilling ways, which I'm sure those of you who are going to come to see our production will find out in person, and we'll give you a little taste and preview of that this evening. I first met William in 2005, shortly after I was appointed to my position as the Met, but before I had assumed my role as the general manager, and I'd sought William out because I thought he would be an ideal candidate to carry on this great artistic visual art legacy that had been fostered at the Met in the 60s with Chagall and in the 70s with Hockney. And that this great collaboration, I thought, of the Met with great visual artists could potentially have its successor in the Met forging a relationship with William. And at our very first meeting, as I recall, and I'm sure you recall, I offered William a new production of Verdi's Attila, and his immediate response was absolutely not. He suggested Shostakovich's The Nose, an opera that I had really was probably the furthest opera from my mind at the time. But since I was already imagining William's remarkable images being projected across the proscenium space of the expanse of the Met stage, I could only say yes. And I was very glad that I agreed, because The Nose captivated opera lovers and visual art lovers alike and became a huge success. And it even sold out, which is something that makes general managers look good in the eyes of their boards. So I've been very grateful to William for helping to make me successful as a general manager of the Met, but most importantly for bringing a whole new way of thinking about opera on the stage of the Met to our audience. And so for his encore, we're proud to present his new production of Lulu, which is the first new production of Alban Berg's masterpiece since the late 70s. And as you know, this is an opera about opera's ultimate femme fatale. And here to discuss it this evening, I'll introduce my distinguished guests, or the artist himself, as well as the maestro who's conducting it, and several leading members of the large ensemble cast. So please welcome to my left, William Kentridge. And to William's left is the soprano who is equally gifted as an actress and who is considered to be the definitive Lulu of our time. She wowed Met audiences several seasons ago as Ophelia in Hamlet. Last season, she was the wonderful Susanna in our new production of The Marriage of Figaro. And we'll talk a lot more with her, but please welcome soprano Marlis Petersen. And to Marlis's left is our distinguished conductor, who jumped in to conduct Lulu on very short notice when Maestro Levine was forced to withdraw, but who in the last 2 weeks has demonstrated his complete command over the score in rehearsals with the orchestra and the cast. He's the music director of the Welsh National Opera, who has conducted Lulu there with great success. Please welcome Maestro Lothar Koenigs. And to the maestro's left is the baritone, I should say, who plays the unusual dual roles of both Lulu's victim and her murderer, Dr. Schön and Jack the Ripper. A star of the Met since his 2012 debut in the Metropolis case, and also a star of Die Frauenschatten 2 seasons ago. Please welcome Danish bass baritone Johan Reuter. And to Johann's left is a favorite Met opera star who has sung more than 150 performances, hard to believe, on our stage, from Cherubino in Figaro, Octavian in Rosenkavalier, Dido in Les Troyens.
Yeah.
Iphigenie. Many more. All roles that she has owned on the Met stage. And she's making her Met role debut, her role debut for the world, in the worldwide role debut, as the Countess Geschwitz in Lulu. Please welcome mezzo-soprano Susan Graham. And to Susan's left is the distinguished and young American tenor who is making his Met debut as Alwa, Dr. Schön's son. And although Lulu marks his first performances with us, he is already well known in opera houses across Europe, where he has excited the public with performances as Siegfried, probably the youngest Siegfried in recent time. And he made his professional debut at the Zurich Opera House as Aaron in Schoenberg's Moses and Aaron, which is, I guess, about as complicated a score after Lulu that you can come by. So please welcome Daniel Brenner. So, Lulu has been in rehearsals now for the past 5 weeks. The first several weeks have been in the subterranean rehearsal rooms on what we call level C at the Met. And for the past week and a half, the artists and the orchestra have emerged from this their subterranean rehearsal dwelling and have been working on the stage of the Met. We still have some rehearsals to go. But I thought it would be a good way, as we typically start off these meetings, these discussions, by showing you some images. In this case, what would be, I didn't discuss this with you ahead of time, but
I don't know.
But it's a.
I'll tell you when to shut your eyes.
It's your production, so it shouldn't surprise you. We're going to be looking at some rehearsal photographs, and we have some video to show you a little bit later, but some rehearsal photographs that are more or less in chronological order that represent the scenes, some of the scenes. And I thought maybe, if you wouldn't mind, William, you could perhaps explain, as we're looking at this, which would take a couple of minutes, what's happening. What's happening, maybe a streamlined synopsis, and also perhaps a little bit about your approach to this production.
Sure.
So if we can begin looking at the images. That's an image.
Okay, the animal trainer. The opera is introduced by an animal trainer as if he's presenting his menagerie, but the different animals represent the different characters in the opera. And he said, this isn't an opera about little pets in your house. This is about wild animals. It's going to show you the human psyche in its bare and naked in tooth and claw. You'll also see this is the first scene in which Lulu is posing for an artist. And the idea of the artist representation of Lulu continues through the opera. In the Berg and in the Wedekind, there's always a portrait of Lulu present, even though the artist doesn't survive the second scene of the opera.
Few survive.
Few survive. Yeah. Few survive. It's a bit like a boxed TV series. You want to watch one episode and something happens right in the end, you have to say, we'll watch one more episode and one more episode. And that's kind of how the opera works. But it follows Lulu from her first husband who dies of a heart attack when he sees her in the arms of the artist, to her being married to the artist who slits his throat when he realizes, in fact, she still has another major lover who's been with her for years. And this is the scene with the composer, a kind of an alter ego of Alban Berg, who's written music for her to perform. And this is backstage in her dressing room, where even though the artist is dead, she still wears the clothes that he's designed, the hands. The language of the artist goes from the first scene to the end, which of course for me is a fantastic chance to allow the language of ink drawings to be the language of the visual language of the whole opera. This is Lulu with her. We're never quite sure if he's really her father or not her father, or it's just her first pimp. But it's a father figure to whom she's both anxious about and also warm towards. The great thing about the opera and the character of Lulu is that it's impossible really to pin her down. If you say she's simply a femme fatale, you've missed out huge amounts. If you say she's simply a victim, you miss out huge other elements of her. And the great thing of working with Marlies and the whole team is that the 6 weeks of rehearsal is kind of discovering who she is and allowing this openness of either being open to people or indifferent to them or predatory to shift as we go along. And this is when her lover, Dr. Schön, you can hardly recognize Johann in it, but there he is, thinks he can escape her. But in fact, as she becomes indifferent to him and she says to him, well, do what you like, I don't really care, he realizes he's completely and utterly unable to leave her. He has to make a connection to her. And he says, this is the worst day of my life. When she's told him he has to leave his fiancée and live with him, he says, no, to be controlled by her, this is the worst day of my life. And she's saying, I've never felt better in my whole life. And this is, again, spot who this is on the lineup on the this is her lover, the Countess Geschwitz, who pledges her loyalty to her entirely and is one of the most steadfast of the characters in the opera in her devotion to Lulu. There's a lot of, it's a question always that goes through, how do you dress Lulu? Is she in a series of fabulous ball gowns as an occasion to change clothes 11 times in the opera from one more beautiful garment to another? And in fact, we decided to look at what constitutes the erotic in a different way. So in fact, most of the time she's wearing the leftover clothes of the men in her life. In this scene she wears a shirt of Dr. Schön, in another she wears the coat of her lover Geschwitz, in another the jersey of the artist. Trying to locate what is the elusive but completely irresistible attraction of her, not in the most obvious ways. At a certain point, her husband says to her, you understand, for me to have an honorable life, there's only one solution. Here's a gun, now go and shoot yourself. And she says, can't we get divorced? And he said, don't be crazy, and then you'd be going off with the next person. So he gives her the gun for her to shoot himself, but then turns his back, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's the end of that husband. Which is an interesting thing, because the moral question is always posed. You can say, well, she's a monster, she just shot her husband in the back. But you can say, what was much more monstrous, presenting a gun to your wife to say, do the honorable thing and shoot yourself. So one's sympathy changes. He says to the son, Daniel over there, when he's completely in love with her and he has her in his arms, and she says, well, isn't the sofa we're sitting on where your father bled to death? And he's got a moral choice. He either says, you're right, that's terrible, I need to move away from you, but he just says, shh, don't even mention that. And he's lost with her. So The moral culpability is very ambiguous and very interesting in the opera, not nearly as simple as...
It's not very nice of her to have said that.
Well, it clearly makes the
came to
choice
my
his.
mind.
It makes the choice his. She's never different from what she claims. She calls it as it is. Right.
Yeah, that's what her lead is about also.
And she ends up, of course, in London. Her fortunes go up and then decline, and the last scene is in London, where she is a streetwalker, and her third and final client is Jack the Ripper.
Maybe you could also explain, you have several extra characters who are non-singing
We have two.
acting.
We have two particular people who don't. One is almost, and they both act as someone between the world of the projections and the actors and the singers on stage. And one is she's not exactly the ghost of Lulu, and she's not the alter ego, but she's a reflection of Lulu from the screen up and down. And it's a fantastic singer, Joanna Dudley, who is present as the pianist initially, but then as this figure who, particularly in the interludes between the scenes, gives another image of Lulu herself. And the final image of Countess Geschwitz, Lulu is dead behind the screen. So one of the great things about working at the Met is that, or with opera as a form, is that one can take a drawing which is the size of a page of a book and work with it where it's this 5 stories high and 60 feet wide, and perform the opera almost inside the image itself. And that's been the challenge, to both make the story completely visible and followable, one's watching particular singers on stage performing the characters, and in labeling the world of them also to expand to the scale of the proscenium with the drawings.
Thank you very much. Marlis, I guess we should ask you, since you're playing Lulu, and for those of you who read today's New York Times, you will have seen an article about Marlis. I don't know if you saw it, which not only talks about her working on the role, but also announced that after this will be her 10th production of Lulu, she has decided to retire the role from her repertory, even though she's at the top of her game, and is moving on to other roles. So maybe you could talk a little bit, though, about since you have done this opera in 10 different productions, really, how do you feel about Lulu as victim versus master of her own fate?
Yeah, this is an issue I always discuss a lot with critics, because they always ask, how is that to play such a femme fatale? And I say, she's not. For my experience doing it so often, she's not femme fatale. Because if you think of the fact that she's 15 when the opera starts off, and 18 when Jack the Ripper kills her, more or less, she's like becoming a woman, you know, and she's in this transition phase of not knowing who she actually is. But because life has treated her in a strange way, and she was on the street when she was 12, and Schiegel picked her up and used her for his purposes, and then Schön came and took her and also used her, but because he was not on the same level of, he was a power player, you know, he couldn't marry her, so he was giving her away to other men. So for me, of course, she has this natural behavior with sex. It's like eating, drinking, having sex, washing your teeth. That's all one for her, because she has grown up with that, and it's not something bad or something dirty. It's just one part of life, and because she knows that how she has to deal with men, she enjoys that also, because it comes very natural to her. But the men, for them, it's this thing, this urge, you know, and she becomes easily a projection field for all the wishes that they have, and all of those are a little pervert. They all have their own little things, how they want sex, how they imagine it, and she's easy to fulfill that. Yeah, and so she's femme fatale in this sense, that she tempts the man with her own ingraspability, with her natural fulfillment of every wish they have. Yeah? But on the other hand, she's the victim of all these projections, yeah, that make her life difficult because in the end, I think that's my experience after all these years. Dr. Schön is the only man she loves. Also not in a healthy way. I say that, but he's the only one that could carry her through the life, and it's also a father figure and a caring person, and has actually the necessary power and eye level to meet her on her energy. That's what I think. But for me, Lulu is again and again, and I think for another 10 times would be a new opera, because all the views of the directors are so different, and you can point out so many things, different things. You can point out sexuality, you can point out the fall of the rise and the fall of a woman. You can point out the psychological aspects of her and the man around her. So it's a box of Pandora, actually. Yeah, that's what she is.
Well, we should hear from Maestro. I'd like to ask you a musical question in a moment, but first, maybe from the characters, the singers who portray the characters who interact, whose lives are affected by Lulu, by Dr. Schön, played by Johan, by the Countess, played by Susan Graham, who is in love with Lulu as well, and by Alwa, who is also smitten and whose life is destroyed, like along with his father's. So how do you as see your characters? I mean, it's obviously Johan, you've performed this before, yeah. But Susan, you're doing it for the very first time.
Very first time.
And second time. So you all have different levels of experience.
But you did it the first time in this production.
In Amsterdam, yeah. The first time that William did it.
Right.
Last spring.
Because this production actually opened in Amsterdam last June, that's right, and now comes to New York. So how would you, any of you, how would you describe your characters and how your characters evolve or affected or changed by their relationship? Obviously, Dr. Schön's character is the most complicated one.
I'm not sure. I mean, I think it's really two things. First, I would say this production started in Amsterdam, but we've been really, really busy working on it, and I think it's developed very, very well here in New York. It was good in Amsterdam, but I feel I can confidently say that it will be better here in New York, which is not always.
Natürlich.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you, Susan.
That is. That's one thing. The other thing is maybe for the audience, a character can seem more complicated than another character. But for the character, we are all the center of the world. We're all the center of our world. There's no, if you play a character, there's no such thing as a, what do you say, side character? Nebenrolle. Because we only know the world that
you are the 100% of what you're doing.
Exactly. But that's a side issue. My character is interesting because when we meet Lulu, she's still young, and we see at an early part of her life, it's stopped also, her life is stopped very early. In Dr. Schön's case, it's different because we see him at the end of his life, he's older. And when in the time where the opera happens, where the action happens, we can almost feel sorry for him because he's at the end of a very long journey that ends really badly. But we should remember what he has been doing in the past. And I always do that. I can feel sorry for Dr. Schön in the situations he's in. But when I think about what he's been doing to this girl when she was, say, 12 years old, that's a horrible thing.
What exactly? I don't know the answer to this. What is the backstory? What do we know about the relationship of Lulu and Schön? How early?
I think it was just after Schön has found her on the streets when she was around 12. And I think Dr. Schön came in, I don't know, maybe a year later, maybe 2 years later.
And she was abandoned.
Yeah. Yeah, she didn't know her mother, so she was already, selling flowers or something on the streets. And
I think that's
My Fair Lady.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a byword for something else. When I say that to the Marlies, if I kaufte Blumen, she was selling flowers.
It wasn't flowers.
Flowers.
Yeah, her own flower, actually.
Oh dear.
Oh dear.
She went there. She's German.
So
Yeah, and he was fascinated, I think, by a young woman, but also I think Dr. Schön had the idea of taking her out of that and making something better of her. And she was kind of also progressing with this because she suddenly had a home feeling with somebody. That's how I think.
But
and
your
at least
relation-
it turns into that.
Yeah.
At some point, it develops into that. And when we see Lulu first being a model for a painter, the painter is a friend of Dr. Schön.
He's
Yeah,
setting
Dr.
her
Schön
up.
is always the
He's
doer, the
he's
red line
he's
through
also
all of that.
The person who has married her to her first husband. She then marries the painter. Dr. Schön knows the people that he puts her with. So I think that's what the police would call grooming nowadays. That if we look at her as a victim, that she's kind of being taken care of, but for a purpose.
But then she turns the tables on you in the scene,
definitely.
in the dressing room.
Definitely.
Before she kills you, she seduces you.
She does, and there is a turning point for Dr. Schön in the story when he's in the wardrobe, the theater wardrobe we saw in the picture behind us, and there is a prince. There's an African. No, that's not an African prince. That's just a prince. But he wants to take her to Africa. This prince. He wants to marry her and take her to Africa. And when Dr. Schön finds out, she's not only going to marry someone else, someone he might even know, but he's taking her away.
And there he's temptable suddenly, and she feels that immediately, and really makes him there write the letter to say goodbye to his bride.
It's a great scene.
One of the great opera scenes.
Yeah, I find that too. Also musically, it's becoming so strong.
It's the other great letter scene after Onegin.
Yeah,
And
there are many
Figaro.
letter scenes.
The letters
Berger.
are-
So,
Berger.
and Susan, the newest comer to
Yes.
to Lulu.
Yes. This experience of being part of this Berg world is something that's very new for me. And I feel rather intimidated by all these experts and veterans of Lulu sitting around me because, you know, I've made a career of singing Mozart and Massenet and Berlioz and Gluck and Handel. And to think outside the tonal box has been very difficult for me to be able to wrap my brain around. And I've not made that a secret to anyone, have I?
But oh my, have you succeeded in doing
Oh,
that? Come
thank
on.
you. That's very kind. It's been a huge stretch and a huge learning curve for me. And for that, I'm really grateful. And I really had my doubts as to whether I'd be able to rise to the occasion. But I think it's made me a better musician. At this advanced stage, after being at the Met for nearly 25 years, I think I'm better because of this. You never thought you'd hear me say that, did you?
I won't hold you to it.
Anyway, I've learned so much from everybody on this stage about this opera and about how it all fits together. And my character, Geschwitz, is, as we've often discussed, I think maybe the truest character in the opera. She really doesn't have an ulterior motive. She doesn't really expect anything from Lulu. She just loves her rather unconditionally because Lulu puts her through a lot. It's very clear that there's nothing that the Countess won't do for Lulu, including contracting a disease in order to trade places with her and get her out of jail and all of these kinds of things that...
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
No, it's not that disease.
I know, it's not that disease. It's something much more sinister. But in the end, my character is driven, I think, purely by love for Lulu. And she's the only one who really, I think,
She's
is
the only
honest
one.
and loves
Also,
her.
at a certain point, Schigel says to the crew that Geschwitz, when she is going with Lulu on the streets in the London,
I
that
even
she
go out to
shouldn't do
prostitute
that.
with her.
Yeah, she shouldn't do that because she's the only one that loves. And she doesn't understand the business.
But at the very end, the Countess has lost faith.
Yes. I've lost all my money, and I've lost any respect that anyone or myself ever had for me. And it's a very dejected scene, the last scene of the opera. However, I do get the last 3 minutes of the show. And that's a huge payoff for me. I mean, to me, it's gorgeous music.
Wonderful.
And it's when I realize that Jack the Ripper has stabbed Lulu, killed her, somebody finally killed her, and I'm sort of lying in a heap, wishing I were dead, and then I go, and as I'm going out to see what happened, he comes in, and with this face, this very cold face, he then stabs me. And that's really great.
And she sings an aria after that.
And then I sing an aria.
Yeah. It's opera.
It's opera, right.
Because he leaves and I'm left alone on the stage, but for his dead body, which is lying right here. And the last words of the opera are, Lulu, Lulu, my angel, I want to be with you for all eternity. Boom.
And just before that, Dr. Schön, who stabbed the two women, wipes his knife.
Jack the Ripper.
Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper.
Different person.
Dr. Jack the Ripper.
Yeah.
It's the same singer singing both roles very much, and you see echoes of one and the other. But having done the two women, and he picks up one of the drawings of Lulu and wipes his knife on that and just says, yeah, that was quite a work to do. And that against the kind of the tone of what the Countess is singing straight afterwards is kind of an astonishing saying, this is the world we're in, the mid-20th century, this mixture of aspiration and complete coldness and cruelty.
Yeah.
Maestro. We should.
What should I say?
We should. Well, maybe you could talk a little bit about. You came in late in the process, and you're faced with perhaps one of the most challenging, one of the most thrilling and exciting but difficult scores in all of opera. So how do you deal with a situation like this? Right. You started working on this 2 weeks ago. Tell us about the score and how you approach it and how you deal with all of these disparate forces on the stage and the pit.
Well, I'm kind of addicted to this period of Schön, Berg, Webern. So all this, but not only the Second Viennese School. It's kind of for me as well Bartók and all this what happened on the beginning of the 20th century, and. For Lulu, for example, it's really painful to learn the score, I can tell you. It's so hard and so frustrating, and when you open it first time, you immediately close it again. Because
Susan thinks should stay
closed. It's really hard, but Lulu is a piece, it doesn't come to you. You have to conquer the score. And but when you conquer the score and when it's your own, you can't leave it alone anymore. And so this is a music by Berg. I mean, of course, it's 12-tone music, and it's the first opera for one evening, which is completed 12-tone music. And the 12 notes come for the first time in line when Lulu is singing her song in the second act. Mm-hmm. So these are the 12 tones. And Berg was very clever. And you should not expect, or people ask me, yes, but you have to know this note and blah, 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 blah. No, nobody cares, sorry. No, you will have a very central, overwhelming experience with this music, because the music of Alban Berg, of course, is dedicated to his teacher, Arnold Schönberg. But when Schönberg was very dogmatic in his 12-tone music, like Moses and Aaron, it's completely dogmatic. Berg was very human. And so Berg always takes the audience by hand, and as he does in Wozzeck, which is not 12-tone, but in Lulu it's 12-tone. But the same, you have Leitmotive in the best Wagnerian way, which come always again. He's using English waltz, he's using ragtime, so this is a reference to his colleagues, Kurt Weill and Stravinsky in these days. So, and this is a sign for us that really this piece takes place in this time. But with Lulu, we have a big problem, because Berg died and he didn't finish the piece. So he left the third act. It has 1,326 bars. So he was obsessed with numbers. So if you count 1, 3, 2, 6, you become 12. So, and 12 was a very important number for him. So, and from this, he wrote all the music, but he just orchestrated the first 268 bars and the adagio, so the suite at the end. And now we are performing this in the version of CH, and it's always a big challenge for a conductor to make a decision. Do I do this with this Paris picture, or do I just do first, second act and the suite? Of course, I didn't have a choice, and I'm very happy to do this now in the CH complete version.
Just so, sorry to interrupt you, but to explain, the 3-act version that you're doing was first introduced in the 70s.
Yes, 79 in Paris.
Right, and then that was the version that was done at the Met by Maestro Levine previously.
Yes, and it's normally done like this.
Right.
So, and just to give a little bit of background, Helene Berg, so the widow of Alban Berg, the wife, she asked Schönberg, Webern, and Koenigs to finish the piece. And Schönberg refused it because there's a very, in the third act, somebody says Saujud. So he was absolutely offended by this, and he said, no, I can't finish this.
It's a racial slur.
Yeah, it's a racial slur. And Webern, if you know the music by Webern, it's tiny, 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 always very minimal, very, very, very small pieces. And he couldn't do this because he said, oh, I have never wrote a piece of 1 hour. So music by Webern takes 11 seconds or 3 minutes or 6 minutes. So and Koenigs, he was much too far from this in this moment. He was not so much familiar with the 12-tone system in these days. So then Helene decided not to finish. And she insisted not that the opera was not to be finished. Now in 72, I think, when she died, the researchers went on and went on and went on, and CH finally did this third act, and it sounds like Berg. Maybe it's not the strongest music in the first picture, but to be fair on Berg, he didn't have the chance to revise it anymore. So, but I want to say one more thing. This is very important, and this shows something of the sensuality this piece has. Berg had a love affair. He was in love with Hannah Fuchs, and in German you have the notes we call the B natural, we call H, and F, Fuchs. So he's always playing with this H, F, H, F, H, F. And when Geschwitz is finishing the music, say your last verse in English one more time.
Which part?
The very end, your aria. I'll be always with you.
In Ewigkeit.
Yes, and this is, and then Berg puts always H, F, H, F, H, F, H, F.
Everybody now.
Yes, and so, you know, so this is one more sign that it's a complete human piece, yes? It's not something constructed, it's very human.
It is indeed constructed,
Yes,
but I think no other composer can make such music out of a completely structured piece. It has such a concept from the first note till the last. 12-tone, and all the characters have their own 12-tone line, which is done in you know, the usual
but
thing.
They are taken from her line, you know?
Yeah.
They are taken from her line. So, for example, the Schön line, he takes every 4 note, and then he goes back, so then he
So
has
it's a
Schön.
super construction, and you have sonate, and you have all these different types of music which come again, and it has a mirror inside the film music. So it's so crazily, nobody ever of you would realize that when you hear
and
the
it's
piece.
not necessary.
No, it's not necessary. But it's for, it's for us, for me, example, when I learned that, for me, it gives also a structure in the learning process.
Of course.
Yeah, because you realize, for example, when the sonate comes, Dr. Schön's music, and it comes later on in another point, you already know, okay, now Dr. Schön must come in, and of course it's like that. So it's a story in a big concept which makes such beautiful, dramatic, romantic music.
Right.
Yes.
So it's very accessible, really.
It is.
Yeah, it's very accessible. It's very accessible. Or for example, as I said, Berg was not dogmatic as Schönberg, and he uses from time to time C major. C major. When you know Wozzeck says, hier ist wieder Geld, Marie, die Löhnung, was vom Hauptmann, so he's talking about money, and C major was for Berg very simple, not very...
Not a rich harmony.
It was very banal. And when Schön is going to the Börse, how do you say it?
Yeah, the stock exchange.
Stock exchange.
He uses C major, so he's very clever, Berg. So yeah.
And also what's interesting is that the piece still works today 100%.
Yeah.
With the topic of relationships, man and woman, and the stock exchanges, and it's so, how do you say, nowadays, so
It's topical.
Yeah.
I mean,
We can
this
relate.
third act that we were talking about, the scene in Paris, is one scene that combines completely a sort of speculation on the stock market, which during the course of the half hour of the scene, stocks go up, and everybody's trying to give their money to the bank manager to invest. At the same time, the Marquis and various other people are trying to trade in Lulu, to sell it to a brothel in Cairo. So there's that kind of human trafficking, which is completely part of it. So it's saying the stock exchange, the human trafficking, the blackmailing of different people, of that sort of combination of speculation and sex is put together so astonishingly strongly that for me it would really be a gap in the opera to not do the...
Yeah, as a story, definitely. It's also
and thematically,
increasing
and saying when you say, how can
for
everybody be so cruel in the opera? You say, well, what is the world that is being depicted? And if you think of what were the kind of the cruelties and lack of empathies also in Europe in the late 20s and early 30s, all that kind of nastiness and instrumental thinking and real politics comes inside the room in that scene in the opera.
You know, it's such a powerful and cathartic kind of tragedy that you can't imagine, really, I can't imagine romantic music being the score for an opera like this. It needs this this 12-tone music, I think, to serve this gripping theatrical story that keeps you on the edge of your seat. I mean, partly because of this wonderful production, partly because of this great cast and what you're bringing out from the orchestra. I think it would be interesting just to give the audience a little more of a flavor of how you integrate your art and imagery into the production, to show a little excerpt of some of the video that we put together with the music that is not exactly in sequence, but gives the character, and maybe you can then talk a little bit about how you incorporate your drawings and the process of doing that over the years, incorporating your art into a production like this, which you've done in other productions as well, but in different styles. So if we could show that video, please.
That's a very speeded up version of anything that happens in the film, the opera in 20 seconds, in 30 seconds. It gives you, I mean, what that does, it shows some of the language of the ink drawings in which the black ink has to stand in for the blood of Lulu. In the central film, this mixture of drawings being filmed and real actors. And the way the piece comes together is a mixture of drawings done in my studio in Johannesburg, and then very intense and close work, and work done by the video editor, Catherine Myberg, who's here with us in the audience, and working how this will sit on the set designed by Sabine Tjörnesen, and trying to work out which is the space where the singers will be, what are the images behind them, at which moments is the rhythm of the changing drawings the same as the exact rhythm of the music, when is it against it, when is it still, so we just watch the interaction. And that's the process of the 2 years of work before we start rehearsing.
This began in your studio
This
in
began,
South
yes,
Africa.
the first 2 years of work happened in the studio in Johannesburg, and then the intense 6-week period of rehearsings in the rehearsal room and on the stage of the Opera House. And in fact, the editing of the video is still continuing. Tomorrow we have our piano dress rehearsal, and there is still more editing to be done. And I think we will stop at the day after the full dress rehearsal next Tuesday, 2 days before the premiere. So it continues all that way along, trying to tease out what is the relationship between the music, the performers, and the images on stage.
It's a process that goes
It's an
right
ongoing
up to
process,
the finish line.
right to the end.
You have in your previous operas, Monteverdi's Return of Ulysses, Magic Flute that you did, the Shostakovich's The Nose. Obviously, the art or what you were inspired to create in terms of these scenic movies that get projected onto the scenery and the characters as well are different. What were your inspirations in this case?
Well, in this case, the project started, just to describe the origins. At first, when Peter offered me Lulu, I said, no, it's too long. I don't know what to do with it. Animation, I'll spend a year on 3 minutes. This is 3 hours long. This is going to be 2 lifetimes. And then, so I said no. And then some months later, I had a very clear image of how the production could be done, having seen an exhibition in this very museum of German expressionist woodcuts and engravings and printmaking, where I said that violence of the woodcut of the world depicted by Nolde and Dix and Kirchner was so close that I immediately phoned up and said, you know that Lulu production, I'd love to do it. And Peter said, I know you would, but in fact it's been given to another director. And then, of course, I really wanted to do it. And then some months later, he phoned, you remember that, the Lulu? Well, in fact, the other director is doing something else. And
it was actually only a few days.
Was it a few days? Okay, it felt like I was so...
I got rid of the other director.
I became so clear. As it was impossible, it became clearer and clearer and clearer how it should be done. And then it took off from that. But it's always a mixture of finding both... there has to be a connection to the music, that's clear. But there has to be an interest in the thematics of the opera wider than just its story. So in this, the question of desire, of the erotic and that unclear relationship of desire and the erotic and obsession in many ways, which the opera gave a way of thinking about it. And the third vital thing is to have a sense of what it will be in the studio. What is the medium? What is the way in which not simply to illustrate it, but in which the medium itself finds a connection. And this had to do with sheets of paper that could connect to make one image or then flop apart and become separate, that one could have this instability of the objects of desire built into the very mechanisms of making the drawings. And that was, which is very different from the Magic Flute, which was a series of charcoal animations, or the Nose, which was torn paper, jointed figures, paper puppet cutouts.
You were once a puppeteer.
I was not a puppeteer, but I've done a lot of work. I studied movement in theater, which is a lot of like learning about puppetry. And it's very useful in terms of thinking, how does one break a movement down to find the shape of a trajectory of movements, which we use a lot in the non-naturalistic part of operatic acting.
In the speaking of acting, Marlis, we almost didn't get you here for our Lulu. We were worried because when the ninth Lulu production that Marlies had performed in was in Munich in a production by the very distinguished director Dmitri Chernikov, who was directed Prince Igor at the Met, and the set, which I did not see, I saw photographs of it. It had a series of glass walls on an opening night. Tell us what happened to you.
Yeah, I mean, that was, I think, the dangerous stage I've ever seen. You imagine a box of glass walls, which are 3 meter long and 4 meter high. Each of these glasses like 500 kilos, and this 24 times. So it was like a labyrinth of glass. And what happened to me that night is I was supposed to run out on stage to meet my colleagues there. And because of some strange light effects that happened, I missed the entrance of the glass wall and I ran full speed into the glass. And
In front of the public, I mean.
lost, yeah, and it was opening night, second act beginning, and I bleeded like hell. But you know, and I was, half a second I was gone, and then I woke up and I saw the conductor giving the upbeat, and I was running out and catching his upbeat and singing, and I was bleeding on my white dress. It didn't stop for 5 minutes, and they brought me tissues from outside, and we sang, and I did this and that, and drop.
But everybody thought that that was part of the production.
Yeah, of course,
they?
outside from the distance, you think,
How
wow,
did they
it's
do
a
that?
very authentic acting.
And great special effects.
Special
Pipe
effects.
through her nose.
Yeah, but what actually happened was, I mean, the bleeding stopped and everything, but next day in the computer tomography, the nose was broken. So, and I had, this was the first show, and I had like 5 more coming up, and that was a little tricky, and also involved some therapies, you know, for the brain, because the bump was quite heavy. It's like a trauma that is caused there. And
Well, playing Lulu was traumatic enough.
exactly, yeah.
Dangerous to your health.
Yeah, and so that was, it was like a wake-up thing.
So you've played this now 10 times. Tell us, what's the most extraordinary thing you've been asked to do when playing Lulu?
Ooh. I'm
Fasten your
What was the
seatbelt.
most extraordinary thing you were asked to do, and what's the most extraordinary thing you actually did?
No, you would, it's very funny actually, everyone would think, yeah, Lulu is for sure somehow naked. That was not the case, not in one of those 10. I mean, there were seconds, you know, where a cloth fell down, but that was not really the thing. I think it's more about the covered nakedness, you know, the erotic, which makes the erotism, actually. But I think, you know, all of the 10 I did, they had some very special things. One was kind in a Dracula atmosphere. Another one was Konvichny used a big puppet made from rubber, which has exactly the same size and outlook like me. And Dr. Schön and Alwa was actually discussing always with the puppet. And I was standing next to them, looking at them, was not involved in the topic, right? So all these projections and not meaning her really was, and I did some very deeply psychological ones where the victim was the most important thing. And I also, you know, I had a discussion with William, because I came in with a very heavy attitude to Lulu, because I just came from Munich, which was very rude and cruel, throwing her on the floor, throwing her on the wall, and it was always like bumping on the floor, and I had many blue spots, and so he said, you know, lift her up, you know. Also, and I found back, which was maybe one of my first Lulus, this moment when she still enjoys the game with the men, the lightness of this floating Lulu happiness. And it's a gift for me that for my last Lulu, this comes back to me. So it's good. Even, it's easier to let her go, right? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, Maestro, you now have, how many more rehearsals? 3 more?
3.
No, 2, actually.
Well, with the orchestra, 2 more rehearsals, and tomorrow the piano press.
So what in these final days, what are you focusing on? What do you need to do to polish this to get it ready for the opening on November 5th?
Well, I think now we are on this moment where we have to play the piece, you know, and we have to, it's very important just then to play. Now we have all done our homework and talked about articulation, blah, 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 blah. I mean, it never finished, but now you have to, to send the piece
To give birth.
Yeah, birth. And so we have a pre-dress on Friday, one opportunity to play the piece. Of course, afterwards, small corrections, and then the dress rehearsal. And then, hopefully...
you will be all there?
hopefully, luscious opening night.
Luscious, that's nice.
So, we're just about running out of time. Daniel, we didn't hear much from you. Do you have some final
Sure.
words to...
My role is Alwa, and I've been told that Alban Berg saw himself in the role a lot. So all of the love that Alban felt goes through Alwa, and she is touted as the person that loves Lulu the most purely, and I love the image of Lulu. We didn't grow up together, but when she came into my life, I became more like a brother to her, and since the beginning of our relationship, I've been completely smitten with her, and in my mind, Alwa is sort of like a puppy dog following her around, and I have a very domineering father, so I'm well contained, but I want to be strong, I want to be worthy of her, but there's still something about the character that he can't break free of the domineering father. But what I really loved learning the role was that I get the most beautiful love music. Almost everything that I sing is about how fantastic this lady is. And it's just, so to the end of my life, she gives her health in order to save her. Lulu takes my health, but I still love her. And she's given me an incurable STD, but I still am just over the moon for
But that's
for
not
the
how
woman.
you die.
No, I'm not dying from that. The African prince comes in and is roughing her up, and with what little strength that I have left from advanced syphilis, I come in and I want to stop it, and he ends my life.
Which is also, that's very interesting. All the deaths of the men are quite strong moments in music in this piece. His death is just...
That's because Berg...
It's not even worth...
That's Berg's
That's
own
because
death.
Berg loved you.
Yeah. But you're also what I like about Alwa is that he still has this blooming fantasy of and positive things. He's a composer, and you love the images of Lulu, and you say it's an adagio of this and a largo of that. He's how do you say it?
Idealistic.
To write an opera about you.
Yeah.
He actually does.
Great. William, any final words?
No, just to say what an astonishing privilege and revelation, more than a privilege, a revelation of what transforms when you work with wonderful singing actors. And that one thing's right, you've got an interpretation, you've got an idea, but the Lulu that emerges, and not just Lulu as an opera, the different characters, is such a negotiation and revelation between an impulse a director can give and what comes back magnified from the singers. It's always so much more than the impulse you can give. And in this case, it's been such a treat working with all of you to discover layers and levels and wit and liveliness in the characters and situation, much more than one could ever imagine from an analysis. And that happens only in the rehearsal room and on stage. And I think for all of us, it's more than one can either analyze or imagine. It's something that one recognizes as it emerges. So thank you. Thank you, all of you.
Thank you all very much. We hope we'll see you on November 5th.
Yeah.
Again,
Or
it's much better if you see it twice, and it's even better if you see it 4 times. Then you will really love it.
That's true.